Welcome to the Holy Land in this biblical site of the Bethlehem area. We're filming this video just outside of Bethlehem because these are the fields here that Boaz would have owned, where Ruth met Boaz, where Naomi probably lived out in this area. And this is the story where the most beautiful, precious scenery and story takes place in the Bible of Ruth and Boaz meeting, and then Ruth and Boaz becoming part of the lineage of David and then of Christ. So it's a beautiful place here. You can see in the background, a long ways away, is the Dead Sea. You can see the Judean wilderness here. You can see the fields. This is where David would have pastured his sheep, probably wrote many of the Psalms. This is the fields that Boaz would have owned. So anyway, in this video though, we're going to be looking at the story of Boaz and Ruth. It's one of the most precious stories in the Bible. This is going to be a good video, so make sure you follow along here. The story of Ruth takes place during the time of the Judges, about 1300 BC. It shows God's love and welcome embrace of non-Israelites into the family of the chosen people, even to the extent of being part of the lineage of King David and Christ. It's a love story planned in heaven and carried out by God, and it all took place right here in the outskirts of Bethlehem. So here's the story setting to really understand this beautiful story. It takes place in Ruth here. It says, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Kilion. And they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem of Judah." So that's right where we're at. "And they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other named Ruth. And after they lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Kilion also died. And Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband." So here you have this woman who is from this area, Bethlehem, goes down to Moab, which is south here, to my left, lives there for some time, says 10 years. And while she's there, her husband dies and her 2 sons die. And the only thing she's left with is really no blood family, just 2 daughters-in-law. And it says that next we see that Ruth, one of Naomi's daughters-in-law, chooses the God of Israel and chooses to abandon her people and her God and embrace the Israelites and their faith and the true and living God of Israel. So it says in Ruth 1:16, it says, "But Ruth said, 'Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you.'" Naomi was saying, "Why go with me? I will have no more children. Why come?" And Ruth wanted to go with Naomi because she wanted to be with Naomi. She loved her, and she was choosing the true and living God of Israel. So she says, "Do not urge me to leave you or return from following you." Ruth says to Naomi, "Where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." So after this time of discussion, Ruth just pleads. She wants to go with Naomi and make Naomi's people her people, and Naomi's God Ruth's God. So beautiful. So anyway, Ruth chooses to abandon her people, leave her family, her country, her gods, and choose a true and living God and come to Israel. So now we see now how God supernaturally provides for these 2 widows. So we have 2 widows, Naomi and Ruth, who now come back to Bethlehem, back to Israel, back here to Bethlehem, because this is where Naomi was from. And it says in Ruth 2, it says, "Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz." So Boaz was one of the relatives of Naomi's husband. "And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, 'Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor.' And she said to her, 'Go, my daughter.' So she went." So right here in this valley here, we've kind of looked at the lay of the land here, and we have Bethlehem right behind us, and then it kind of falls down to a plain. So we believe right out here in this area is where Boaz probably had property and where Ruth gleaned, because it was kind of the flat area where the grain fields would have been. The shepherds would have been on the hillsides, and the shepherds didn't have their sheep in the farmland, so it was a farmland that they had the wheat fields and barley fields. So Ruth goes out then to glean in the fields, and gleaning was to go after the ones who had picked. That's what was the leftovers. So gleaning was getting the leftovers. So Ruth was going to get the leftovers for survival for her and her mother-in-law Naomi. So she goes into the field, and Naomi says, "Go, my daughter." So she went out. Ruth goes out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, so just a little on the outskirts, and this, like I say, we think this is it. And he said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" he asked. And they said to him, "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers." So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. So Ruth is out here gleaning in the fields, and so now we see Ruth is a hard worker. She's out helping to provide for her mother-in-law, and she's doing what she can to earn a living and to carve out a living. So now we see how God not only provides for provisions, physical provisions, but now we see how God provides a husband for Ruth, who has chosen to make God her God and the Israelite people her God. So it says in Ruth 3, it says, "Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, 'My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore and anoint yourself, put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do.' And she replied, 'All that you say I will do.'" So Naomi says, Boaz is my blood relative. Go down, sleep at his feet in the threshing floor, and he'll tell you what to do. So Ruth does go down, sleeps there, and then Moab and her begin a relationship. And then we see how it ends in marriage. It says God richly provided, and then they become married. And so it's a really special story. It says in Ruth 4:13, it says, "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went in to her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, 'Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you as a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him.' Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, 'A son has been born to Naomi.' They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David." So here you see this lineage wherein Ruth is allowed to become part of God's sovereign lineage, where David would be born, and then of course from that then comes Christ. So a beautiful story here of how God provides for widows, how Ruth chooses to leave her country, her people, her gods, and make Jehovah, Yahweh, the God of Israel, her God, and you see how God richly blessed her. So we see a great example in this. We can see where Christ says, he who takes up his cross, who doesn't take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of being my disciple. Who does not hate even his mother, father, even his own life more than me is not worthy of me. So we see this example in Ruth, who did in essence become a disciple, a follower of God, and we see an example here for us to follow, in that Ruth left everything to follow Yahweh, the God of Israel, and how God richly blessed us, and how God will bless us as well if we follow him. So what are some things that we can observe in this beautiful story? Well, we see that even though it appeared God had dealt harshly with Naomi, God had a sovereign plan for her and a plan for Ruth, and he provided for them, and God wanted Ruth to become part of the lineage of Christ. And God also wanted to show his acceptance and inclusion of any person outside outside the Jewish nation who wanted to make Yahweh or God their God. So sometimes we think that God was only interested in the Israelite nation. They were just a vehicle, a mouthpiece for Him to speak through the whole world. And we see that God loved all of mankind, and anyone who wanted to become part of the Jewish faith was welcome to do so. God embraced them. In fact, God had special laws for foreigners who came into the Jewish faith. And we see how, because of Ruth's abandonment of everything to follow God, how God blesses her, and she became part of the lineage of David and then of Christ. And so this story here deeply strengthens my faith, and it deeply shows me a great example in Ruth, who was willing to leave all to follow God and make the God of Israel her God and her true and living God. So what a wonderful place here. You can see the plains here. We're just right outside of Bethlehem, and I'm just looking down here, and I can just imagine the fields where I can see Ruth down there, I can see Boaz down there, I can see Naomi. I can see where it all took place. I can see David as he pastured and shepherded his flocks. I can see David on the hillside probably playing his harp, writing a psalm, learning how to use his sling. So just a real privilege and honor to be here and experience this. And hopefully you have enjoyed this video, and hopefully your faith is strengthened, and hopefully we will be like Ruth, who would leave all to follow God. So thank you for watching, and God bless.
Oh